The current law as it stands now, what risks do you see by those who are filing these lawsuits against the president? I mean, just kind of along the lines of, be careful what you wish for, you might get it.
Well, there is a chance of bad cases making bad law. And that's always a concern that you have when you look at a high-profile case. I don't see how these cases can prevail under the existing law. I don't see a good faith argument that President Trump lacks the authority that he used because there's virtually no conditions on that authority. And I also don't see how a judge is going to run the table on every one of the sources of these funds. Some of them will likely go through, and that's more than enough for the next 2 years to start construction. I think the more productive use of our time is to focus on how we can have a workable solution to the NEA, which had some very noble purposes at the outset. And one of those is to go back to the original draft and the concept of having an affirmative act from Congress after some period of time.
And that's another question I just have. We talk about legislative intent. We talk about what happened in the, what was originally in the act and then taken out of the act. But before we can ever get to that, we have to deal with the statutory framework as it exists. So you only go to legislative intent if there is a discrepancy in the statute. And I would argue, I'm not nearly as an accomplished a lawyer as the gentleman sitting down there, or the witnesses sitting down there, but it's so vague in so many different ways and so broad-based that I don't know how you would find a discrepancy in it, particularly in order to ever go to those kind of questions.
No, you can't, and history actually works against the challenge. That most of the emergencies that have been declared are largely economic and diplomatic issues. And frankly, they're not that significant in terms of emergencies. Most people, frankly, in the United States had no idea that there's dozens of national emergencies ongoing. They didn't have any idea that we had an emergency over uncut diamonds from Africa, or Zambians who might be, passing transfers of wealth. The problem is that this is so easy that the past administrations have just used it to get an edge or to deal with a problem internationally on a unilateral basis. So when a judge looks at this, is she really going to say, well, even though we have never ruled that a president cannot exercise the authority in this way, even though we've had dozens of still ongoing emergencies, I'm going to use my judgment as to what constitutes an emergency on the border on the NEA, even though emergencies aren't defined. Now, you might find a judge like that, but at the end of the day, I don't think you're going to prevail. I mean, that's what judges are not supposed to do. They're not supposed to substitute their judgment for what's an emergency. And when people say, look, well, it's not an emergency because look how the numbers have declined. There's less than 400,000 people being captured or arrested along the border. Once again, a judge is going to say, look, it's not my job to say that 1.2 million is an emergency and 400,000 is a problem. Elections have consequences. This president ran on this being a national security concern. He won, and he declared this as a national security.
Who has jumped the wall. And what I mean by that is it possible for somebody who is not a Dartmouth student to sneak into Dartmouth, take courses for 4 years, and leave with a Dartmouth degree? It turns out, to my knowledge, that is completely impossible. It has never happened. And that means that this wall is protected far more savagely, jealously, and determinedly than any wall that we could possibly put around this country. Any wall that we put would necessarily be porous. This wall, as far as I can tell, is completely opaque. I want to start by talking a little bit about poetry, and then I'm going to pivot to politics. And I want to talk about poetry for the simple reason that we have connected with Dartmouth a poet, I have to say, of some subtlety, who talks about walls, and talks about walls in a kind of complex way. And in a way, this is a very nice portal to thinking about walls in general. It gives us, if you will, a little bit of an aesthetic vantage point we can learn from Frost's New England toughness, his realism, his skepticism, his willingness to see things from more than one angle. I discovered Frost at Dartmouth, and to me he was just a completely refreshing contrast with romantic poets like Wordsworth, whom I was more familiar with. All this talk about daffodils, and all this talk about the beauty of nature. But what about the deer, its leg caught in the tendrils of nature? What about the vicious beauty of nature? What about the harshness of nature? And Frost had this ability to capture that too. But reading Frost is kind of tricky, as I discovered myself here on campus. One of the first poems I learned about in connection with Frost was, of course, the famous, or perhaps infamous, poem about the road not taken. A very self-congratulatory poem. I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. In short, I'm just a super fantastic guy. I made the tough choices that have made me into the remarkable personality that I am. Is this actually Frost's message in the poem? This was the message I took when I first read the poem. And yet, reading the poem again and again, and then with some guidance from a campus Virgil, if I can say so, you begin to pay attention to the poem. And that's what I want to suggest for a moment. Let's pay attention to the poem. Verse 2. Then took the other. He's looking down two roads. He says, just as fair. The other road is just as fair. And then the key lines, though as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same. In other words, he looks down the first road, he looks down the other road, and the two roads are the same. He can't tell a difference. It's not a less traveled road. It is the same. And what that means is that the poem really is about the difficulty of choice. The poem is really about the fact that life has to be lived forward, but knowledge, in a sense, only obtains backward. When you graduate from Dartmouth, you decide, am I going to go to law school or become a poet? Am I going to become an engineer or am I going to work on Wall Street? And which life is going to be better for me? And Frost is saying, you don't know. The roads are worn about the same. I think it was Hegel who said that the owl of Minerva flies by night, by which Hegel meant that we only understand history in retrospect. Only looking back can we assign meaning to history, but meaning invisible to the people who actually live there. They couldn't see it. And so it is with us. Looking back, we go, wow, I made the right decision. Oh, I made the wrong decision. But for you at the time, it is very difficult to know. And so ironically, the skepticism of the poem cuts against the naive reading. And this is Frost. This is kind of the way he does it. And so with that, by the way of preamble, I want to turn to Frost's poem, Mending Wall. Kind of a strange title for a poem, Mending Wall. And the poem on the face of it is about why walls are terrible. This is the point of view of the narrator of the poem. Something there is that doesn't love a wall. What's the something? He doesn't say, implying that it's something rather vague, a feeling. I just don't like the idea of a wall. And we can all sympathize with that. I'm telling you, as an immigrant who has been on both sides of the wall, I totally get it. There's something in me that doesn't love a wall. And yet the poem ends on the opposite note. The last line, good fences make good neighbors. Uttered not by the narrator, but by the other guy. The non-narrator. You may say the target of the narrator. And throughout the poem, the narrator is railing on the other guy. He's a brute. He's a savage. And all the while that he's railing, the other guy is putting up parts of the wall in between their two properties. And the other guy doesn't say a lot. And the narrator continues to bloviate. Walls are bad. You're a savage. But you notice something that he never does. He never actually tries to stop the wall from being built. He does nothing to actually knock the wall down. And there's something else he doesn't do. He never claims that he has any rights on the other side of the wall. At no point does the narrator ever say, you know what? I have the right to come and take the fruit off of your trees. I have the right to come and eat out of your refrigerator. I wouldn't mind climbing into bed with your wife. All of this is you almost say, this is the unspoken script of the poem. The only objection to the wall that the narrator seems to have is he just doesn't like the notion of a wall. It offends him somehow. It offends a kind of universalism that I would argue is built right into the American experience, is built right into the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. Not all Americans, all men. So there's a universalism asserted there. But notice that this notion that all men are created equal is itself an American idea. I don't find it in anybody else's charter of emancipation. And so you have American exceptionalism united to American universalism in a very interesting way. And I think that is really the heart of our debate tonight. Frost likes to talk about coming at the truth sort of slantwise, his term, slantwise. And I think that's a very good way to think about our political debate. Because here we have Trump, a very different character than Frost, I will have to admit. Frost is grumpy, taciturn, philosophical. Trump is Trump. He is, as my wife says, a bit out there. And yet, we have to remember that Trump is playing a very different role than Frost. Frost, if you will, is the poet. If you will, you can call him a philosopher poet. Trump is a statesman, a leader. If you don't like the dignity of that term, a politician. But this distinction is of critical importance because, and this may not be very obvious when you're on campus, but it's very obvious when you're out in the world, at some point, the necessary skepticism of thought has to give way to the necessary dogmatism of action. And what I mean by that is that at some point, it's not enough to say on the one hand and on the other hand, something there is that doesn't love a wall. Good fences make good neighbors. Well, are you going to build the damn thing or no? At some point, you got to go. You got to decide. You've got to move. You got to take a decision, and if you decide not to do it, that's your decision. And so Trump is out there making a case for the wall, and yet on the face of it, his case is manifestly inadequate. Trump says, we need to have a wall for 3 reasons. 1, drug traffickers. 2, violent criminals. And 3, sex traffickers. We have to stop, in other words, the bad guy. Now that argument by itself may be true or may not be true, but is clearly insufficient because the wall may stop those people, but it would certainly stop a whole lot of other people too. Let's call them the good guys, people who just want to come here for a better life for themselves and their families, and a wall would clearly do that too. So the real case for the wall can't just talk about the bad guys, it also has to consider the case for stopping some good guys. On the other side of the debate, you've got all the people who say that Trump hates immigrants. Now, this argument that Trump hates immigrants relies on making a very squid-like confusion between the immigrant and the illegal. Notice that people say, whoa, illegal immigrants. Illegal illegals are not actually immigrants. Illegals are people who essentially want to jump the line. To jump the line. There is a big line, and there are some people, and I would put myself in this category, who were born a very long ways away from America. Quite frankly, we don't have a Rio Grande that we can come thrashing across or a ditch that we can tunnel under to get to America. We actually have to get here by a very circuitous and lengthy route. It costs a lot of money, it costs a lot of tears, and sometimes it takes a generation. And yet, why does our welfare count less than somebody who happens to be just across the border? Who basically says, I don't care about this line. I'm going to jump it. And because I am a tragic humanitarian figure, I'm going to rely on the goodwill of the other side, of the people on the other side of the line, to sacrifice not them, but Dinesh, who's too far away to get here this way, and I'm going to do that in the name of humanity. So you can see right away that there's a complexity here. America actually has a pretty generous immigration policy. We let in about 1 million legal immigrants a year. I wouldn't object to increasing that number, and we set rules for what kind of immigrants we want. I don't like those rules. The rules as I see it are dumb. Quite frankly, I happen to have come to America alone as an exchange student. In fact, I only got my visa here at Dartmouth. I took the Montrealer up to Canada. I got an extension. That's how I was able to stay in this country. And so, the point I'm trying to make is that the rules, family unification, which is perhaps the centerpiece of our immigration policy, if I had really worked at it over the last 35 years, I could have probably brought 100 people to America under family unification. It was intended to be for people to bring their spouses. But the way it works is something like this. I sponsor my wife, I sponsor my parents, they sponsor my other siblings, they sponsor their wives, they sponsor their parents, and this is how the game is played. And everybody who has been through or near the process knows it. It's a scam. It's a scam.